record on this computer. We already have some questions in the question box, so Rita will actually be answering your question during this presentation. Let's keep it a mystery until the end. And then Lee, I want to add a tree to the northeast of my backyard, thinking about a cedar or a juniper. Both of those are going to be kind of slow growing. But I don't see why either one would be a bad choice other than they're a slower growing tree. So it'll take longer for you to get a good canopy on those.
Yeah. And they can, I actually, in our landscape design, I think Teresa had shown after 3 to 5 years, she had planted a few and they did fill out quite nicely. So, you know, not super fast growing, but within a couple years, you know, you'll get some decent size screening or whatever you're trying to achieve with that. So great. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm sure there's still a few people rushing in the Zoom door. Thanks for chatting here, shouting out where you're Zooming in from. And today we're going to be doing trees for Earth Day. So I'll go ahead and share my screen here. We are requesting that you use the chat box for any chit chat going on, and then the question and answer section for any questions that you might have for us so that we can make sure that we get those to you. Alrighty. There we go. Yeah, so happy Earth Day, everyone. I'm Tina McIntyre, Florida Friendly Landscaping Agent here at the IFAS Extension in Seminole County. And I'm joined by Katie McCormick, who's our Residential Horticulture Agent and Master Gardener Coordinator. And we're super excited to bring this to you today. It's our final webinar for Earth Week. We have been doing webinars all week to celebrate various topics, partnering with the City of Sanford, who has graciously donated rain barrels, butterfly container gardens, shower heads, and trees, and their time to bring this event to us and be able to encourage involvement so that we can learn and also have some goodies to help us on our journey to be more earth friendly and water wise. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. So the UFIFAS Extension in Seminole County is part of the Land Grant University system, which was created in 1862 by the federal government. And we're here to extend the research and knowledge of the University of Florida to you, to residents all throughout the county, and throughout, now that we're virtual, we've had participants from all over the world. So it's always interesting to see where everyone's zooming in from. And it is really a collaboration of local, state, and federal funding, which runs our office. And it includes family and consumer sciences, which is like finances, nutrition education, agriculture, horticulture, and 4-H, which is our youth programming. We're found in all 50 states and all 67 counties in Florida. And so a lot of people say it's the best kept secret, but we definitely want to always, you know, share this information, and we are an equal opportunity institution open to all. So we're very glad that you could join us today. We do offer classes all the time, not just for Earth Week. And so if you're interested, best place to check us out is on the Seminole Extension Eventbrite, or our Facebook page has a wealth of resources and videos. We also have a YouTube and social media. We're on Nextdoor, so lots of different places to find us. As there you can see our phone numbers, and we also have our Master Gardener Help Desk, where our wonderful trained Master Gardener volunteers help our residents with their plant questions, insect questions, and various things like that. So we definitely, if you joined us earlier this week, you know how important the survey is to us. And I will just reiterate, so please do fill out this survey. I will send it just after our webinar. There's going to be no delay today, hopefully. And I can download the list of participants and email that right over to you after we're done. So please just take a couple minutes to click through and let us know what you learned, what you enjoyed. And then I'll send another survey in about 3 to 6 months. It's a totally different survey just to see, have you planted your tree? Have you installed your rain barrel or whatever, if you're one of those lucky winners. So we do have 100 trees, and we will talk about the species of trees that we're giving away today. If you join us for the whole hour and you complete the survey, you are eligible to win one of the trees. And as you can see, we have about 67 people joining us right now. So chances are pretty good here. We got good odds. And again, this survey can be done by your mobile device on a desktop, so it's super easy to do. So for our webinar today, we're going to learn a little bit more about Earth Day, benefits of trees, how to plant and establish a tree, how to prune a tree, which can be really part of, proper health and establishment in the beginning years of the tree, and then the specific species. So we'll actually get into a little bit about all the different species that will be given away this weekend. So yes, one more time, why not say it again? Happy Earth Day, everyone. Earth Day was actually started in 1970 by Senator Nelson and a lot of students, college students. It was around oil spills, factories, and really led to a lot of revolutionary legislation, and our federal environmental protection agency that have really laid the foundation to protecting our environment all throughout our country, but also in here in Seminole County. And it's really amazing because this legislation has been modeled by other countries as well. And the ball has rollen over the years, and so other countries have been involved. So in 1990, it was already more of a global event, reaching 141 countries that were involved in Earth Day celebrations. And then today, it's one of the largest secular observances in the world, marked by more than 1 billion people every year. So with the planet having over 7 billion people, a seventh of them, and y'all are here today celebrating, a seventh of them are celebrating Earth Day, and acknowledging that we have one planet to protect. And so to kind of just drive that home a little bit more, NASA, which is our National Aeronautics and Space Administration, they acknowledge that the Big Bang happened 13.8 billion years ago. That's when the universe was created. And Earth formed 4.5 billion years ago. So you can see here is our picture that was taken by astronauts from the moon, and of our beautiful planet that is so unique. Really, when we look at the other planets in the solar system and throughout the galaxy, Earth is just so unique, where we have the perfect amount of light from the sun, the perfect amount of just water and elements and everything, to where we have life, and you are part of that, and so are trees. So about 400 million years ago, estimated roughly, is what scientists have understood, that that's when trees actually became. And we'll get into the evolution of trees and plants a little bit. So basically, trees didn't just kind of come out of nowhere. They evolved over time, just like all life. So you can see here is the creation of those photosynthetic organisms that are in, aquatic environments. And then we have the creation of our mosses, liverworts, those bryophytes. Those mosses were really the first kind of plants, even though they're not, really similar to trees that much, but they're one of the first living plants and land plants. And then we graduated to ferns, where ferns were actually reproducing by spores. And so they, kind of started to dominate some of the terrestrial environments. After spores, we had conifers, and conifers will go over, those are our pine or our cone-bearing species. And we'll actually have two given away this weekend, our gymnosperms and conifers. Those are, pine trees, and any of those, I think somebody mentioned juniper and cedar, any of those cone-bearing plants. So again, this is a long period of time, but then we started to get angiosperms or flowering plants. And those are really just so enriching to us. Of course, a lot of the other plants are as well, but angiosperms or flowering plants give us so much gratification, which we'll go through. Of course, food. And here you can see one of our very early plants was the orchid and the monocots or the grasses. So they began to evolve. And then eventually, you can see just the diversity of angiosperms and flowering plants that have, come to fruition on this planet. Roses and everything, sunflowers, morning glories, everything that we enjoy and plant in our garden, you can see kind of coming along here. So getting into some of those benefits, and today is all about trees. Of course, we love plants here at Extension, but we're going to focus on trees. So some of those social benefits that we have, of course, trees give us a real sense of place and bring a certain level of tranquility to our lives. So you can see here, one day I was visiting out at Tosahatchee, which is a great wildlife management area just east of Orlando, and you can see the sun setting, but it really have a picturesque look because you can see those native pine trees, really giving it that landscape perspective. Communal benefits. So a tree doesn't have to be necessarily on your property for you to consider it in your landscaping design, like we talked about with Teresa on Monday, where we, really can take into consideration trees that are in our neighbor's yard blooming. We can see that view from our house. As we drive into our neighborhood, and we just drive by our neighbor's house and we say, geez, I just like that tree so much. And you benefit from that, even though it's not, really under your care or on your property. Of course, food, we absolutely, they provide food, which we all love to eat and congregate, go out to dinner. So here you can see a jackfruit growing in South Florida, just an abundance and a wealth of food. And I know Katie and I were mentioning our mulberry trees earlier this week, where, the mulberry tree is just so abundant, and these trees just provide so much food for not only us, but wildlife, and we'll see more of that later. They visually enhance the space as well. So not only that tranquility, but kind of like providing screening or enhancing the space by hiding utilities or maybe other types of things. So I know here at Extension in Seminole, we have that very large tower, cell phone tower right next to our office. And we've been able to use some trees to help kind of calm that it's a lot of fencing and just metal and things like that. So they can be used to assist with that. Economic benefits. So we can definitely put a price on trees, and we can quantify how much benefit they provide the economy, the local economy. So you can see here where we have a definite increase in property values. So one tree and landscaping is actually estimated to enhance property values by 5 to 20%, which is quite a lot, especially now as property values are quite high. And so when we're talking 5 to 20%, that can definitely make a difference. And as we saw in our landscape design on Monday, some of the work that gets done by our landscapers is just really beautiful, really enhances that outdoor feeling that the landscape has. But diving in a little deeper, today is Earth Day, and so a lot of the world leaders are talking about climate change and talking about what we can do for sequestering carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is what we breathe out. It is what trees breathe in, essentially. And it's also what is emitted in our power plants and cars and a lot of that type of stuff. So we want to use trees to sequester carbon, and that is quite valuable to do so. So here it's estimated as $62 per tree. And basically a 30-inch live oak can provide an overall benefit of $283 per year. So, that is not nothing. That's definitely a good amount. And you can see it breaks down into electricity. So thinking about how we're saving on our energy bills. I know I have two beautiful live oak trees in my front yard, and they do shade the front half of the house to where, I'm getting that savings. And then air quality. And I'll talk a little bit more about the environmental benefits, but air quality as well to provide that purification. If you live by an interstate I-4 or one of those toll roads, trees can really help to benefit that. And then actually, we do have this great, I'll put this in the chat box, but this is a really cool calculator that you can actually play around with and put in, the diameter of your tree and the various aspects of what you have, what you might have as, actually, Katie, I can't get to that link because I'm in screen share mode. Or there you go. Katie just chatted it. Thank you. So yeah, check that out and play around with it. So environmental, of course, that's what we all think of when we think of trees. It's a given, so to speak, but diving in, they reduce stormwater pollution or what we call non-point source pollution. So that could be, when we all live in a watershed, when we have pollution, so such as, fertilizers or dog poo or debris, trash, things like that. Plants really help to buffer those physically, but also cleanse them and cleanse that water. So they clean the water through evapotranspiration as they take the water up through the roots, and then it leaves through their stomata in their leaves. And that actually helps to purify the water. And it regulates temperatures and provides shade. They provide food and cover for wildlife. So supporting all of our great pollinators and birds, mammals, all that stuff. Of course, like I mentioned, they purify the air and cleanse the air, and they reduce erosion. And that's actually really important here in Florida because a lot of the times phosphorus can be bound up with our soils and our sediment. And when we have erosion, that phosphorus, if it's washing into our waterways, it can, cause more pollution. So we want to make sure that we're using trees to prevent erosion. And now I will turn it over to our certified International Society of Arboriculture certified arborist, Katie McCormick.
So now we're going to get into planting and establishment of trees. And this is going to be I don't know. I like planting trees and establishing them and pruning them. So that's the next part, is how to plant, establish, and then prune them to keep them looking good as they grow. So before you even decide where you're going to put this tree, you need to figure out where's the most appropriate spot for it. So first you want to look up. We don't want to plant trees under power lines because they're going to be an issue going forward as they grow up. And then you want to look around. Is there space for a tree in this location? So trees do have an extensive root system that can be 2 to 3 times the size of their canopy. Their main root system is usually going to be within the drip line of the canopy. So if you have a tree that gets 40 foot in diameter in its canopy, it needs a decent amount of space for its root system as well. If you don't have room for a really large tree, you might consider planting something like a crepe myrtle or a Chickasaw plum that's going to stay smaller, or you might even consider planting a shrub that gets a little taller, maybe a shrub that grows to 10 or 15 feet, and pruning it to look like a little tree in your yard. But we want to look up and look around to make sure that there is space for our tree and that it's not going to be growing up into any power lines. And then before you actually dig your hole, you should call 811 to come out and mark your utilities. So it's a free service, and we want to do that because it keeps you and your neighborhood safe. You aren't going to accidentally take out power or cable to the rest of your neighborhood or get into the water. Many utilities are just a few inches below the ground, so we want to make sure that when we're digging our holes for these trees, we aren't hitting any of these utility lines. 811 will respond within a few days to mark the location of the buried utilities. They'll either come out with flags or they'll come out and spray paint areas with utilities. You can tell them this area that you want them to check, or you can say my whole property, or you can just make a circle of white flags or white spray paint on the ground where you're planning to dig your hole and tell them that's where I want you to check and make sure there's no lines. To have 811 come out and check for that, you can go to www.sunshine811.com. And they are required to come out within a few days of putting that in. So you have 2 oak trees in your backyard. As they grow, the roots spread along the foundation. Will the roots affect the foundation? It really depends on how close they are to your house. So typically we want to plant trees at least 15 feet away from our foundations. I guess that would be another look around. Just because they do get extensive root systems that could possibly have an effect on that foundation. So 15 feet away from the foundation of your house does provide you some protection from those roots getting large. All right, so next, once we have picked where we're going to plant this tree, we want to actually prep the root ball. So when possible, the newest science says you should actually be trying to plant your trees bare root. So you actually want to wash your root ball to reveal the root system itself. And this is mostly because of poor nursery practices, unfortunately. So at a lot of our tree nurseries, they will plant these trees in small containers and then pot them up into a larger container. And they don't take the time to actually tease those roots out so that they stop circling from when they were in that small container. And when they pot them up, that circling continues, which you can see in the picture here, where we have those thick roots in the center of this root ball circling around. When you have those circling roots tucked into the root ball like that, they can actually strangle your tree as the tree gets older. Imagine that trunk whenever it gets to be 20, 30, 40 inches wide, and those roots are still there wrapped around it, choking it to death. So we want to make sure that we are getting rid of those circling roots. If you have the time and the energy, actually rinsing all of the soil off, checking to see if you have circling roots, and cutting those circling roots out is your best option for a healthy tree long term. Otherwise, just take it out of the pot, and if you see any circling roots, just visually inspecting it, go ahead and cut those away, or tease them so that they aren't circling around the trunk anymore, but instead are going straight out from the trunk like a wagon wheel would. And once you're planting these trees, you should actually be able to see the topmost root right at the soil surface. So if they have put soil on top of this pot to fill it back in as the soil decays, you want to actually pull that soil away until you see the flare of the trunk and that topmost root. We want to be able to see that right at the soil surface. Once you've prepped your root ball, we want to go ahead and prep the hole that we're going to plant this tree in. And let's see. So I have a question with a newly planted maple from the fall. There are leaves forming along the main trunk below where the canopy spreads. Should you trim those off? So for a young tree, those are okay to keep. We'll talk a little bit more about pruning in a minute. Aesthetically, if you just don't like how they look, you can trim them off, but otherwise you could leave them. It's helping the tree to grow a little faster. So for planting the hole, or prepping the hole, we want to dig our hole that we're planting these trees in 1.5 to 2 times wider than the root ball, but actually a little bit shallower than the root ball. So we want to hold that root ball so that about 10% of it is actually above the line of the soil, or the soil line, or above grade. So 10% of your root ball should be above grade, but the hole itself should be much wider than that root ball. And that's because we want to soften up the soil that the roots are growing into and encourage that plant to actually root out into our native soil. You want to use a hole to mud in the tree when backfilling with native soil. So we're actually filling our hole with water and then pushing the native soil back into that hole. And again, this gets rid of any big air pockets, but also allows for good aeration of that soil so that we have a decent amount of spread. And it also helps to kind of keep that tree upright. So all that soil is going to settle in around the roots and hold it in place. You actually shouldn't put any kind of amendments in the soil when you're planting a baby tree, because that's going to encourage it to stay just within that amended area of soil, as opposed to actually rooting out into our native soil. Part of the reason that planting bare root is also a good idea is sometimes that soil composition of the potting media that these plants are planted in is super, super organic. And whenever you plant them straight into our Florida sand, it's hard for them to actually break out of that organic material and grow into the sand, because the sand and the organic material that the potting mixes are drying at different rates. So you actually can get some air pruning accidentally, because the organic material will dry a little faster than the sand and expose the roots on the edges of this plant, and then it root prunes and it gets stuck in this little hole. So again, where possible, rinsing off as much of the potting mix as possible, just so it's in contact only with the native sand, is a better planting practice, although it is a little harder to do it that way. Once it's planted and you've mudded them into the soil, or mudded them into the ground, you can go ahead and mulch right up to the edge of the root ball. We don't want to mulch over the top of the root ball, but right up to the edge is just fine. And then once the tree is established, you can put a decorative amount of mulch over the top of its little root ball, but we want to keep that away from the trunk so that we don't accidentally rot out our trunk with too much mulch. So once we've prepped the planting hole, question on 811. Yeah, it's free. It's free to actually have 811 come out and mark your lines. So that's a free service, because they're just trying to make sure that you don't take out the neighborhood with your digging. So 811 is free. Please use them. And next we're going to be, I think, answering Paula's question here. Nope, that'll be after this one. Oh no, it is on this one. Okay, so we want to water 2 to 3 times weekly until the tree is established. If we are experiencing drought conditions where it's super, super dry and everything's starting to look crispy, you should actually be watering in that first month or so pretty much every day, just to keep up with the amount of water that's being pulled out of the soil by the sun cooking it. So if we are getting good amounts of rain a couple of times a week, watering 2 to 3 times weekly is fine in the first couple of weeks. Otherwise, water every day for the first 2 to 3 weeks. And then you can taper that back down to 2 to 3 times weekly until the tree is established. It's going to take 4 to 8 months, depending on the size of your tree, for full establishment. But luckily for you guys that are planting trees right now, we're about to enter into our rainy season. So you may have to baby this tree for a month or so, and then the water from our rains is going to actually be watering it for you most days here in Florida. So this is a good time of year to start planting trees, just because you don't have to water them as often because we get all those afternoon rains. And then for staking, you should only stake if needed and only for the first year. So if you have stakes on a tree that's been in the ground for over a year, those need to be removed. When we are staking a tree, we don't want the stake to be right up against the trunk of the tree, which is usually how you buy them in the nurseries. Instead, we want to set up our stakes so they are away from the trunk of the tree and helping to hold it in place, but also allowing for some sway with the wind. You can see 3 different staking methods that you can do here on the screen. So you can have them out to the side with those rubber or flexible materials stretching up to the tree, the stakes in the ground. You can also have stakes to either side, and then that staking material, which is rubber or flexible material, wrapping around the trunk from either side. If you have 2 to 3 stakes as opposed to just the one, this allows for some movement of the tree and helps your root systems to establish better and stronger in that first year. Okay, we answered that one live. We will be sending out the slides after the lecture, so you guys will be getting these. And I guess I'll answer Andrea's question before we get into pruning. So biggest concern is that the homes in your neighborhood are really close together, where they're only 10 to 12 feet apart. You don't have very large yards. So this would be a case where you would want to consider growing either a very small tree. There are trees that only get maybe 15 feet tall, or you can prune them to keep them a little smaller, or you might consider just getting a large shrub and shaping it up to look like a tree. So for fertilizing trees, especially whenever we are first starting out, you don't need to fertilize them for the first 6 months that they're in the ground. We just want them to push out those roots. And if you fertilize, it's going to encourage them to actually push out a whole bunch of leaves that they might not be able to support well. So it could slow them down a little bit over time. After that, if you are growing this tree in a lawn where you already fertilize the grass, you don't need to worry about fertilizing at all. Most of the time, there are enough nutrients in our ground that the trees actually don't need any extra fertilizer. But if you want to baby them along in the first couple of years that they're in the ground, or if they look like they're a little bit yellowed and could be a little greener, just using a regular all-purpose fertilizer like a 606 or a 10010 would be fine for fertilization. And for 811, yeah, you can just dial 811 on the phone, or you can go to the Sunshine 811 website to contact them. All right, on to pruning. So why do we prune? We prune to improve aesthetics, to improve the structure of the tree, and to improve the health of the tree. So those are the three main reasons why we would want to prune: to make the tree look a little better, improve the structure, and improve the health. And the last two are the real reasons that we're going to be talking about pruning today. Typically here in Florida, our gardens don't look like the gardens of Versailles, where everything is a perfect triangle or a perfect square. So what tools do you need when you're pruning? For a young tree like you guys are going to be working with today, we want to use just hand pruners. These can be used to cut things that are up to 1/4 of an inch wide successfully. And you want to make sure you're using bypass pruners where the blades actually bypass each other like scissors would, as opposed to anvil pruners where you have that hard, solid surface that the blade is crushing up against. That'll provide you with a good clean cut. Next up, if you were going to shear something, which with your trees you shouldn't be using these, you could use lopper shears. Also, you could just use larger hand shear or bypass pruners for pruning larger branches up to 1.5 inches in diameter. Once you get up to over that 1.5 inches, you want to start looking into getting a pruning saw, which will cut large woody limbs up to 6 inches or less in diameter. And then finally, if you know how to use one or have taken some safety courses on it, a chainsaw for larger branches up to 3 inches in diameter or more. You also, if you're going to be using a chainsaw, should have safety goggles. And if you're pruning things above your head, probably should be wearing a hard hat or helmet to help protect your head. And then finally, for your pruning kit tools, you'll need some oil and alcohol. So the oil is to keep your tools properly oiled so they don't bind up and that they cut nice and sharp and quick. And then the alcohol is to reduce the spread of disease between plants. So if you're pruning multiple different trees or multiple different shrubs in the same day, spraying a little bit of alcohol onto your pruning tools between plants will help to make sure you aren't transferring diseases from one to the other. Quick lesson in branch anatomy, just so we're all on the same page here when we're talking about where to prune. A node is where a bud for a new branch can form. Nodes are going to be above leaves. So if you've got a leaf or a leaf scar, the little bud right above that is a node, and that can grow into another leaf or it can grow into another branch. Internodes are just the places in between those buds. If we are talking about suckers on a tree, those are undesirable shoots that are coming up from the roots. The crotch of a tree is where the branch joins the trunk of the tree. And another one that's not on this list is water sprouts, which are twiggy growth that usually grows from an injured tree. And those are the branches that grow straight up whenever a branch is cut incorrectly, or if we have storm damage. For our young trees, though, you probably don't have to worry about water sprouts. So when we're pruning, and why we cut is we want to prune for structure. When we're talking about structure in a tree, we want a tree that is shaped almost like a Christmas tree. So it should have branches evenly spaced all the way around the trunk. If you were a kid climbing this tree, you would want to be able to walk up those almost like a stair leading up the trunk of the tree. We also want strong angles of those branch attachments. So when we're looking at the crotches of these branches going into the trunk, we want a U-shaped connection, as opposed to something that looks like a V. So V-shaped connections are going to create included bark, which is where bark gets in the way of the wood joining together. And when that bark is in the way, you get a weak attachment between the branch and the trunk, and it's more likely to fail in a storm. So if you have branches that are forming with a V attachment style, where you have a really sharp angle between the branch and the trunk, you either need to put some weights on that to pull it out and force it into more of a U shape, or prune it away, because that's going to be a danger as the tree gets older and a place where it could fail. We also want to make sure that we have a strong central leader. And a strong central leader just means that you have a trunk that starts at the base of the tree and goes all the way up to the tip, and there's no branches competing for height with that. All of them are shorter and again, kind of that Christmas tree shape to that main central leader that is going from top to bottom, or from bottom to top. For health, we want to make sure we don't have any crossed branches. So if branches are crossing and rubbing against each other, one of them should be pruned away so the rubbing isn't happening. And we want to remove any diseased or dead materials as well. And then for aesthetics, just because you want to make sure your plant is staying beautiful. If it has seed pods, you can remove those, especially if they aren't providing food for wildlife. And you can prune lower branches as the tree grows up to allow you to walk under the tree or access the trunk of the tree as well. And so proper pruning for crepe myrtles is actually, you shouldn't really be pruning crepe myrtles much at all unless you're following the just general structure guidelines that I told you here. Crepe myrtles do stay smaller, so you don't necessarily have to prune them for a central leader. You can see in this bottom center picture here, these crepe myrtles have been pruned just to have a nice open canopy. And to do that, all you do is prune away super twiggy growth and select for those main branches as the tree is growing, as opposed to lopping them off once a year. That lopping them off once a year at a certain height is considered by a lot of horticulturalists to be crepe murder. It's not really good for the trees. It actually makes them bloom less. And I think it makes them a little bit less attractive, unfortunately. So if you let a crepe myrtle grow, its natural short form is kind of this soft looking, wispy, beautiful tree. And whenever you chop them at the same height every year, you're creating something that looks kind of stumpy and reducing the amount of blooms that you're going to get off of the tree as well. There is a whole document on pruning crepe myrtles. So if you just look up crepe myrtles IFAS, it would pop right up for you, IFAS.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Katie. It's really right plant, right place. And I think a lot of the times the crepe myrtles get put in a place that's too small for them, and then people hack back. So it's best to, allow them to reach their full potential and not hack them back every spring. We really don't recommend that.
And then I got a question on where and how to apply the alcohol. I usually just keep a little spritzer with alcohol in it, kind of like what you would use to clean your hands now that everybody's worried about keeping your hands clean. And I'll just spray that on the blade of the plant, or on the blade of the pruners, and allow them to sit for 10 seconds before I go on to the next plant. All right. I'm not going to be answering any fruit tree questions today because those are really different from our shade trees, but we are offering a Get Your Grove On class this summer where we're going to be talking about all the fruit trees you can grow over the course of 5 or 6 weeks. So if you have fruit tree questions, please join us for those classes. And there we go. So how do you cut? When you're pruning branches, we want to prune at the branch collar. And the branch collar is where the branch bark ridge of that plant meets up with the branch that's coming into the trunk. And you actually usually will get a little raised area. So we're cutting outside of that raised area. The reason we cut there is the tree is most able to heal itself there. So if we cut right at that branch bark collar, it allows the tree to heal a little quicker. If you're pruning any branches that are over 1 inch in diameter, they should be pruned with multiple cuts. So the 3-cut system, first we come out from the area that we're going to cut and we cut up underneath the branch about halfway. And then we come from above that for our second cut and cut down, meeting that first cut. And then we come in and cut the stub off at that branch bark collar. The reason we do it that way is so you don't rip the side of your tree off. So that first cut is creating a stopping point. The second cut is cutting down into the branch and cutting it away. If the branch suddenly fails before you get all the way through, that first cut will keep the limb from ripping down the side of your tree and pulling away wood and bark. So it's a protective measure. And then the final cut is, of course, just to bring the tree back to the bark collar and allow for a good pruning wound healing. And finally, don't use pruning paint. So pruning paint or pruning tar both will slow the ability of your tree to heal over its wounds. And by using those, you're making it harder for the tree to actually heal over the injury that you've done to it by pruning. And then finally, we want to start it off right and finish right. So pruning a tree to maintain proper branching and health continues for up to the first 25 years of the tree's life. You may need a professional to come help you prune your tree if your tree is near power lines, if your tree is too tall for you to reach the branches that need to be pruned, if the branches are too thick for your tools to be able to cut through, if the branches are over valuable property and you're going to need some way to hold them up away from that property as you cut them, or if the branches are really, really heavy. So when you're hiring a professional, you want to make sure they have good references, that they're a certified arborist, that they are licensed, bonded, and insured. And for a certified arborist, you can go to the International Society of Arboriculture, and that'll let you look up your arborists. So Tina, stop playing with my screen. If you want to do that, you can go to isa-arbor.com/find an arborist, or you can go to treesaregood.com. Both of those are an option. So our tree, whenever we're finally done pruning it, should look like the bottom picture here, where we have, again, that kind of Christmas tree shape. The branches are evenly spaced all the way around the trunk, and we have a good, strong central leader, not like our scraggly tree on the top where everything's kind of growing every which way. And the reason that we did this is we want to prevent pruning injuries, and we want to prevent catastrophic failures of these trees as they get larger. So first, the reason we did that 3-part cut is to keep the heavy branches from ripping down the side of our tree, which you can see here on the left, where they did a pruning cut that was of a larger branch and they didn't do that 3-part cut, and it ripped down the side of the tree. And unfortunately, this tree is really compromised now and possibly not going to be able to survive long term. We also want to prune away any V-shaped connections of branches to trunk or V-shaped crotches to keep this from happening. So this is where that included bark, which you can see is this brown patch here in the center, got between the wood of the tree and the wood of this limb. And again, the limb got too heavy and ripped down the side of the tree in a storm. And unfortunately, again, this tree is compromised enough that it's probably not going to make it long term. Over here, we didn't look up before we planted our tree, and now it looks really goofy because the power company has to come and prune away the center of the tree to keep it off the power lines. And then finally, again, here's a tree where we had a bad connection between the live oak's branch and its main trunk. And unfortunately, in a storm, this again fell over, crushing somebody's car. So this is why we prune our trees in the way just outlined, with good structure at the beginning to keep them looking good until the end. Some questions. Is there a maximum amount of pruning a tree can handle each year? Usually you only want to prune once or twice a year, but it really depends on the size of the tree. And I'm going to go ahead and pass this off to you, Tina. I think we're done with my part. And yeah, you've got a lot to get through still.
Excellent. Thanks, Katie. Yeah, so we're going to go through the different species that we'll be giving away this Saturday. So the list includes a Dahoon Holly, Chickasaw Plum, Red Maple, Longleaf Pine, and Slash Pine. So I'll go through each of these. Dahoon Holly, also known as Ilex cassine, is a single-trunked native species. It's a small tree in form. So, you know, I know we're talking about ideas for smaller trees. This would fit that category. It's ideal for a variety of landscape settings, capable of reaching 40 feet, but that doesn't mean it will. So, you know, with the pruning and sometimes the urban environments, it will kind of stifle that maximum height. usually about 20 to 30 feet is what you could expect at full growth in an urban environment, and about 8 to 12 foot spread. And you can see it produces beautiful berries here, red berries, throughout the tree. The berries serve as excellent food for wildlife. They are not edible for humans, by the way. I know we talked about other plants that might be edible for humans, but this one is not. It's in USDA hardiness zone, which means this is where it's suitable to grow. It's going to be zone 7A through 11. So that ranges from North Florida all the way down through South Florida. We are zone 9B in Seminole County. To give you a perspective, the light requirement is full sun to part shade. So you can do it if it's a little bit shady. Now, when we say full sun, that's 6 hours or more. Part shade is going to be that 3 to 6 hours of sun, and that's direct sunlight per day. Soil tolerances, this can tolerate clay, sand, loam. A lot of us are probably going to have that sand. Slightly alkaline, acidic, and wet to well drained. Now, when you see these out in the woods in nature, they're typically going to be in a watershed, in a wet area, a wetland, close to a river or a lake. They really do prefer wet areas in nature. So they like moist soils. That's where it's going to thrive and get to that, bigger heights. It can tolerate drier conditions though. You want to make sure if you have a Dahoon holly, you do probably want to have some irrigation, because if not, the crown of the plant can thin a little bit more. It can have moderate drought tolerance though. So to get through those droughty months of, April and May, it can survive no problem. And then it has salt tolerance as well. So moderate salt tolerance if you're on, say, a reclaimed water. And it is extremely pest and disease resistant. You can see here, again, Katie was talking about that Christmas tree shape. So this one's been kind of pruned and looks real nice in the landscape. Chickasaw plum, again, another smaller tree, about 12 to 20 feet tall and wide. So not getting super tall, not getting, really, really big. A good replacement for crepe myrtle with proper pruning. Rounded mass of slender, thorny branches sprouting from a short trunk. So this one really does need to be pruned to have that central leader, because it's going to want to bush at the bottom from the base and have some suckerings to watch out for. So, if you're looking for that thicket, that's fine. You can let it go. But, if you want that tree shape, you're going to have to definitely integrate pruning for this one. In springtime, beautiful small white fragrant flowers pop really early in spring. You can see them at the top right. It is a true prunus. So Prunus angustifolia. Prunus is the same as your peaches, your plums, things like that. So it is a native Florida plum tree, and you can see the flowers and the fruits there on the right. The fruits, however, don't get as big as, your Georgia peach there. They're only about a ½ inch, so, the size of a dime or so. They're quite small, but they're great for humans and wildlife. So this is one that is edible by humans and wildlife alike. It's in the Rosaceae family. So like I said, your other plums and prunes are plums, the peaches. And it runs USDA hardiness zone 6A through 9B. So it is good for Seminole County and not too far south of that. So if you're joining us, I did see a Kissimmee. You might want to avoid this one. It's a little warm down there. It is a native plant and it likes full sun to part shade. When you see it in nature, you can see it growing, kind of just like in the picture on the right with the pine trees, with the oak trees. So it can take some shade. Again, that's 3 to 6 hours, not less than 3 hours. That would be considered shade. It is highly drought tolerant, and it's can exist in clay, sand, loam, acidic, well-drained soils. Most of our native plants do align with that acidic, low pH. So we're getting, 4s, 5s, 6. If you get a pH test, that's what you're probably, you might be getting. These plants are going to be aligned with those soil pHs, which is really important because If you have a plant that likes it acidic in an alkaline or high pH soil, it's going to not be able to absorb nutrients and have, deficiencies. Very high drought tolerance and no pests and diseases for this, which for a fruit tree is really nice. And again, prefers that low pH. So if you have reclaimed water, sometimes the reclaimed can be a little bit higher on the pH scale. So just something to consider along with the salts that might be in there. Red maple, this is another great one, or Acer rubrum, USDA hardiness zones 4A through 9B. So again, our people south of zone 9B want to kind of be careful with using this species. It is a native plant and it's great for squirrels and birds. They feast on the seeds of the maple tree. And it's a wonderful ornamental, beautiful plant that, you can see here, it is beautiful red. So we're of course late to our fall game. A lot of, the higher north you go, fall comes earlier. Here in Florida, we tend to get fall just after Christmas or so, where you'll see these maples starting to change in the landscape. But it is quite beautiful, and they do offer several shades of that reddish orange. The height is going to be 60 to 75 feet, so it's a big tree. The spread is 25 to 35 feet. These can be, if your neighbor has a red maple tree, it's very possible that you'll see some seedlings germinating in your yard. Very easy to grow. It's going to give an oval, kind of roundish shape on the crown of the tree. And the density is moderate, so not, really dense, but it's going to look pretty full. And they're very, very fast growing. So it is susceptible to breakage. Typically, the quicker that the tree is growing, the weaker the wood. And so, in general, so you can have that breakage, and red maples are a great example of that. So they're a very fast growing tree. They're a hardy tree, but because they do grow so quick, they can have that breakage. So again, proper pruning, like Katie just talked about, is really important. For light requirement, it is full sun, or part shade. So the range is quite wide. You can do this in a variety of light environments. Soil tolerance, again, quite ranging from clay to sand, loam, acidic, and it can take extended flooding. So if you're thinking about a rain garden, or if you have a really wet area, maybe you're on the slope of a pond or things like that, red maples are really good for around ponds, and that's where you typically do see them, is in wetlands and lakes. But it can also take well-drained soil. So if it's wet for an inundated period of time, and then throughout our dry season, this tree is still going to look really nice, and it's not going to look wilted. Pretty moderate drought tolerance in that way. And getting into our pines, like I was mentioning, gymnosperms, our conifers, longleaf pine. Pinus palustris is going to get 60 to 125 feet in height, 30 to 45 feet in spread. Typically, you're going to have the trunk, and then the spread's going to be high up in the canopy. So, as it grows, it's going to be higher up in the canopy. These are kind of amazing, these longleaf pines. They start off in the grass-like stage for about 5 to 7 years. So you can see here on the left picture, it just looks like a little bunch of grass. And it'll stay that way for a long time. And, if somebody who didn't know might say, okay, well, is this grass? Because it's not growing. Well, what it's doing is it's sending down this large taproot into the earth. And then once after 5 to 7 years, it starts sprouting right up. And you can see on the right, it'll start to grow, and it gets that way. And that is because of fire. So this species co-evolved with fire, and it was advantageous for it to stay really small in the early stages of its life, because the fire could pass over and the taproot protected it. A lot of our wild species have those big taproots for it to re-germinate. And then once it is in its growing phase, it goes really quickly so that it can grow taller above the fire, and the fire will again pass through, but it's allowed to continue living. So just kind of an interesting life history piece to it. The needles are going to be up to 14 inches long. Again, longleaf pine. Those pine needles are the leaves, of course. inconspicuous spring flowers. And so you may or may not notice them, and then you'll see the cones coming later. One thing I love about pine trees, our principal recycle yard waste for Florida Friendly is that pines are self-mulching. So as those pine needles drop, they're creating a nice mulch bed below and helping to mulch any azaleas or, maybe native plants that you've planted under it. This is going to be zone 7A through 10A. So pretty hardy throughout the state and a good selection. Florida used to be a grasslands with pine trees essentially throughout most of the state. And so these were a really big part of our, ecological history. Of course, it's native. The cones are going to get 6 to 12 inches. So if you see a really big pine cone, chances are it's a longleaf pine that you're seeing. It's going to need full sun. So not like our maple where it can take a range of sun. You're going to need full sun and light for this species. Soil tolerance, clay, sand, loam, acidic, slightly alkaline it can also take. That would mean maybe 7, 8, it still would do well. And then well drained. So it doesn't like it super wet, but it's very drought tolerant as well. Very resistant to pests and diseases. And it prefers that acidic soil, but with reclaimed water, you might want to kind of test that pH and see if you're having issues. Slash pines, Pinus elliottii, they're capable of reaching 100 feet in height and 3 to 4 feet on the trunk. 6-inch long cones are favored by wildlife. So the animals are actually able to get into those cones and eat the seeds. And the seeds actually are activated by fire. So when they're subjected to fire, they actually burst open and the seeds are able to disperse. And that's how this species is able to procreate. It's good for USDA zones 7A through 11. And of course it is native and it's a fairly fast growing once it gets out of that grass stage. Full sun to part shade. Soil tolerance is clay, sandy, loam, acidic, slightly alkaline, well drained, and occasionally wet. Or slash pines can take it a little bit more wet than the longleaf pine. Drought tolerance is high, and salt tolerance is also high. These can be self-pruning on the lower branches. Pine trees really don't need a lot of pruning care. So I did see a chat about maybe selecting a species that doesn't require pruning. I would get an opinion from Katie on this, but I would think pines really do fall in that category. And again,
other than lower limbs sometimes being in the way as they're growing up and you're waiting for them to get tall.
Yeah. So a good one if you want to kind of plant it, water it, and let it go. And then self-mulching as well. So they're going to be dropping those needles. Again, Florida used to be very dense with pines supporting various species. Here you can see our Charman's fox squirrel. Really special treat if you can see these out in nature. They do love their pine trees. They eat the seeds. And this is our own Florida species of special concern. So it's not endangered or threatened. It's listed as a species of special concern and needs to be further studied. So with that, we are just nearing the top of the hour here. We have just a couple minutes for questions. I want to remind you that I will be sending you the survey very, very soon. So please do fill it out so that you can qualify and get one of these free trees, great species for pickup this Saturday. I'll be emailing tomorrow all of the winners for our week. So stay tuned for that. And then again, we'll be emailing in about 3 to 6 months to follow up with you if you've been able to plant your tree and how everything's going. Just some upcoming classes, and I can put these links in the chat. We have Grow Your Healthy Florida Lifestyle. So that's going to be this Tuesday at 12 o'clock. Katie and I are teaching with a few of our other collaborators, and basically easy tips for fitness, composting, and other healthy lifestyles. You can register there. We'll put all these in the chat and follow up by email as well so you can get registered. Landscape fertilization we're going to have on Thursday, 4/29 at 3 p.m. This is a great class if you are struggling to take care of your turf or have a landscaper that you want to notify them, let them come, or if you yourself are a landscaper. And then we are doing a So You Say You're Florida Friendly event where we're gonna be really targeting HOAs, homeowners associations, community association managers, residents in community neighborhoods to come out and learn about what really Florida friendly is. So it's not just letting the weeds grow. It's not, the conventional landscaping. We're kind of in between. So we want to explain those different aspects. And I'll let Katie talk about, or we have that edible gardening.
So I've got edible gardening coming up this summer, which is going to be just summer perennial or summer annual edibles. So we'll be talking about what you can grow and eat out of your garden, even whenever we get super hot. And then my master gardener, Bob Howard, is actually going to be giving a presentation on flowering trees at the end of May. So it's a really cool presentation. If you want to learn more about trees that you could grow in your yard, we'll be giving a presentation on the flowering trees that grow here in Central Florida really well.
Excellent. Yeah, and so we will take a look at questions. I did see in the chat box really quick, why is there a 0 between the fertilizer? So for fertilizer, it's always going to be nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, those 3 numbers on the bag with a little dash in between them. The 0 is phosphorus, and you always want to select a 0 phosphorus because phosphorus is actually pollution. And so it's illegal to use here in Seminole County. With the nitrogen, that's going to be the first number. That can also become pollution. And so we always want to select a slow release nitrogen. So if you're caring for some of your trees or your turf and you're looking for a fertilizer, now is a good time to do it as long as rain is not predicted. And you want to select a slow release nitrogen, 65% or more with no phosphorus, and that's going to be 0 in the middle. Potassium is great for encouraging blooms like this tree pictured here. That is a crepe myrtle, Katie, huh?
Yeah, that's one that hasn't been pruned inappropriately.
Gorgeous, really. So our crepe murder question, definitely, if that doesn't inspire you, I don't know what will. So longleaf, yes, are germinated by fire. So I think they're just enhanced germination. So the germination, usually how we talk about germination is the germination rate. So if we took 100 seeds, how many would we on average get to germinate? When they're exposed to fire, that germination rate increases. So not that they can't germinate without fire. Sometimes the beating Florida sun might check that temperature box. However, they do see an increase in germination rate when they're exposed to fire. Norfolk Island Pine, missed that one.
Oh, I got it. Yeah, Norfolk Island Pine. They usually grow pretty well here until they get really, really tall, and then we get a storm coming through, and then the top usually snaps out of them and they start looking funky.
Yeah.
Not hurricane trees.
Yeah, I mean, they're not native. So a lot of our pines have evolved to deal with these really afternoon storms, hurricanes, things like that. So yeah, great.
And then bees and trees. I don't know what the question is there, but yeah, trees can be great for bees, especially whenever they're blooming. They can be a really big source of pollen and nectar. So if you have a tree that's blooming, I know when our Chickasaw plum is in bloom, it's humming with bees.
Absolutely. And so we talked about in the beginning the evolution of plants. Gymnosperms, or our pines and our conifers, are actually majority wind pollinated. So, plants didn't actually start to tap into using pollinators until flowers and angiosperms. And that's when the flowering plants came alive. And so that's where the bees really come into play. But with, your pines and your conifers, your gymnosperms, cedars, things like that, they're going to be using wind pollination to pollinate those cones and pine cones.
Oh, she wanted to know if we're offering classes on bees, trees, and pollinators. I am going to be offering 2 classes this summer. I forget the exact dates, on gardening for bees and then gardening for butterflies. So keep an eye out. Those are coming up this summer for pollinator classes.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for staying with us. We'll go ahead and close it out. We hope that we'll see you at some of our future webinars, and we'll follow up by email with a lot of the links that we've shared, the registration information for future classes, and a PDF of the slides and link to the recording. So thank you all so much for joining us, and happy Earth Day. Get out there. We'll see you Saturday to probably pick up your tree. Take care, everyone.